and welcome to Let's Talk. It's me today. We'll have Thomas next week. Today we are going to be joined with Maebe A. They are running for Congress in California's 30th district against Adam Schiff. And also they are the first drag queen to hold public office. They are on the Silver Lake Neighborhood Council. And yeah, they are running for Congress. So we are going to have a discussion with them about the military industrial complex and also talk about their campaign. So let's go ahead. All right, everyone, here's our wonderful guest, Maebe A. Like I said earlier, they're running for Congress in California's 30th. And go ahead and tell us about your campaign and, give our audience a little snippet about you.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. So my name is Maebe. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. And I'm running for Congress in California's 30th congressional district. It just became the 30th congressional district. It's previously the 28th district. But after the census and congressional redistricting, we are now the 30th district, which includes West Hollywood, Silver Lake, Echo Park, the Hollywood Hills, Burbank, Glendale, Atwater Village, all the way north to the LA Forest. So it's a pretty big district. And this is our second time running for Congress. I ran in 2020 and we lost our primary by less than 1%. We lost by only 1,114 votes.
Oh, mad.
We're this close. And so we're hoping that this time we can, cross that threshold.
Also, can we talk about your nails? Can you show up your nails? Like,
yes.
Look at how awesome those nails are.
I'm ready for Easter.
I almost forgot that was a holiday this month.
Same. I'm not really a celebrator.
I forgot about Jesus for a second there. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about the military industrial complex. We'll talk about what that is. I will show a clip of a warning that we should have taken seriously by a former president, and then give our takes on it and even talk about how it will relate to this war. So maybe, can you define the military industrial complex?
Yeah.
Running for Congress too.
So the military industrial complex is the industry related to the US military. Mm-hmm. So, when we talk about our defense budget and, which is the largest chunk of money that we're spending out of our federal budgets, it's not all going to our troops. A lot of that money is going to defense contractors and specifically weapons manufacturers. There are a handful of companies that profit extremely from any sort of war events, companies like Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, they profit whenever there is a war economy. So the issue is that the military industrial complex, not only are they taking a huge amount of the money that goes into the defense budget, but they are also funding a lot of our elected officials' political campaigns. And the issue there is that rather than our elected officials, voting for people policies, they end up voting for, these corporations that are funding their campaigns. And so there's a huge conflict of interest there.
Yeah. And now, okay, so to also give more context, our defense budget is bigger than the next 10 countries combined.
Combined.
And 8 of them are our supposed allies. And what's crazy is that
all up, and it's a ridiculous amount of money. And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Greg. I'm
no.
passionate about this because there are so many other things, so many other social programs that we could be funding.
That exactly. Like, we could have Medicare for all. We can have college for all, federal jobs guarantee, UBI. I can go on, but we'd be here till next Tuesday.
Exactly.
Like, it's fucking ridiculous. And it just goes to show another example of how our two-party system is not a two-party system. It is a duopoly of corporate interests.
No, and like you said, it's actually, when it comes to military funding and support of the American military industrial complex, the duopoly is actually a monopoly, because both parties are going to be voting in favor of these interests.
Yeah.
Look back at, when Congress voted for the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, that was not a partisan issue. That was not just Republicans. That was Republicans and Democrats coming together on a rare occasion, and for what?
Yeah. And that's a beautiful segue to the clip that we are going to show.
Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
So, all I have to say after watching that video is oof. Like,
Yeah.
no one listened, or something happened that prevented us from. What do you think happened? How do we go from a president warning about the military industrial complex, the dangers of what it can do, to now?
It's interesting also because he had mentioned, we have this stockpile of weapons. And what's really interesting to me is I feel like, I think about even when I was in elementary school and middle school and high school and learning about American history, there's this very American-centric point of view to how history is taught here. And, there is this myth that we are always the good guys and that we are, the protectors of democracy across the world. But at what cost? And that cost of war is very rarely felt here in the actual, United States. It's often felt all across the world in developing nations and poor nations, through the use of proxy wars. And, we have this, this unnecessary stockpile of weapons, in particular nuclear weapons. And, the argument is that, oh, well, we need these because places like Russia also have this huge stockpile of weapons. And, the argument is that, if all of these nations have these nuclear weapons, it's going to prevent nuclear war because of this idea of, assured mutual destruction if nuclear war breaks out. I think we need to disarm all across the entire globe. Um, and this idea that we need to, always have this war economy is just absurd. And again, the funding that we're putting into this, it's one of those few areas where, people don't ask, how can we afford this? And the question is, how can we afford this? It's not even just a financial question, it's a humanitarian question.
It's so sad because what is reflected at the federal level, we see it at the local level with our police departments.
Absolutely, absolutely. And our, police forces have become more militarized than ever before. And I think, anybody who participated in, the George Floyd protests, recalls the militarized police that came out to.
LA looked like a war zone in June of 2020.
Yeah.
It literally looked like a war zone.
Absolutely. And, what baffles me is that police departments here are allowed to use chemical weapons. They're allowed to use tear gas when that's actually banned in international warfare. It's banned by the Geneva Convention. So if it's not allowed in warfare, what makes it okay for the US to be using it, on the people that live here? I mean, no right whatsoever anywhere, but, for police forces to be using it domestically, I think it really speaks to how messed up things are.
And it also goes back to the hypocrisy of how the US is the hero or whatnot when we are basically using a local military militia or whatever you want to call it, killing some people and use chemical weapons. Our leaders like to use those examples when they're talking about these terrible countries that we need to save, and yet we're doing it to our own people. So it's like, how dare you? There's a lot of hypocrisy when it comes to it. It really, really pisses me off.
Same.
So let's say, well, we need to get into Congress, period. But let's say you're elected and you're about to tackle this issue. How do you think you're going to approach it?
First of all, I refuse to vote for a defense budget that high.
Or I'm so sorry, because it pops in my head and I know it's gonna go away. How do you feel about progressives voting for these defense budgets?
It baffles me. It baffles me. For a number of reasons. First of all, I'm a pacifist. I think to avoid war at all costs. When we look at the history of war, when has it ever been a good thing? Never. And anytime that there's a new war initiative, it always seems so pressing and current and necessary. And there's a lot of fear mongering built around it and a lot of propaganda to try to get folks to be afraid that, okay, we need to engage in this for our own safety and for the safety of democracy. And it's just not true. And ultimately, people are going to suffer. And really, it's not the oligarchs of any nation that are going to be the ones suffering. It's going to be the everyday working class people who, already suffer enough, who already don't have healthcare, housing, education guarantees. Throw a war into that equation, and again, the people who are marginalized are going to become more marginalized, and the folks who are profiting off of war are going to become more and more wealthy. And it's it just speaks to the wealth gap. And
it keeps the wealth gap because if they are having an excuse to pay into this military industrial complex, they don't have to give a fuck about healthcare. They don't have to give a fuck about jobs or making sure people are being fed or being housed. They don't care. So as long as they keep feeding the war machine, they're not gonna feed its people.
Yeah, exactly. So
I know, literally, it's just when once you realize that, it's like, well, shit. But Yeah, I think, if you're progressive in Congress, vote no. It's not
Yeah,
hard.
it's not even like, even beyond the actual, the war factor, something that a lot of folks don't know is that the US military is the largest industrial polluter in the world and in world history. And, you know, I find it extremely hypocritical for, somebody who claims to be an environmentalist to just blindly vote year after year for this ever
Mhm.
increasing defense budgets, which again comes at the expense of war and the human cost of that, but also the environmental impact of,
Mhm.
imperialism is detrimental to our planet, just in terms
Yeah.
of waste and pollution.
And I hate the lame excuse that they give when they say, "Oh, well, it was going to pass anyway." So
Well,
what? You have a moral stance. You vote with your conscience. And if you truly believe that you are against the military-industrial complex, if you truly believe in all the social programs that I just listed before, and of course the environment, you would vote no.
exactly. And if elected, I will be voting no on these, defense budgets that are in the hundreds of billions of
Mhm.
dollars annually.
Yeah, we're holding you to that. um, but yeah, it's just and another thing that really irks me is that when people describe like the military industrial complex as like failed wars, or like, I'm like, or they're just going to war to like it was just a big failure. Going to war period is failure. If you cannot do anything um with diplomacy, then I don't know, like that's a big failure to me. Going to war
Absolutely,
period.
absolutely. And even, I it's kind of interesting. I've always thought about, well, what's the boundary between war and non-war? And, it's kind of hard to define where that line is specifically. And most people will define it as, when you take steps of military aggression. But it's so much more than that. Even when we think about
Hmm.
what's happening with, between Russia and Ukraine right now, which is, in the spotlight globally,
Hmm.
even all the sanctions that we're putting against Russia, sanctions are an act of war. Even though it's not military
Hmm.
action, it's an act of war. And when you think about sanctions and again, who they are most affecting, it's going to be
It's the everyday person.
every working class people of that nation.
Hmm.
And, while I disagree with, the Russian government and the Russian oligarchs, the folks that are going to be suffering first and most are going to be, working class and poor
Hmm.
people who are living in Russia. And they're not the ones, behind this invasion and behind
Yeah.
these policies. So,
Yeah. At the end of the day, folks, I mean, if you're staying vigilant and you know that your threat is feeding into the military industrial complex, because a lot of them have donors. Yeah, just hopefully a progressive runs in your district. um,
totally.
well, maybe thank you so much for coming on and having this talk with me.
Absolutely.
Go ahead and shout out your social media and your awesomeness.
Thank you. So you can find me on Instagram at Maebe A Girl. It's spelled MAEBEAGIRL. Or you can find me on Twitter at Maebe MAEBE _A _girl GIRL. And you can also find us online at maebeagirlforcongress.org. We would love
Mhm.
any help you can give us for our campaign. We are entirely grassroots, corporate free, which I think all candidates should be. And, we want to enter the halls of Congress without any sort of corporate influence in our pockets and, be a representative for the people, which ironically enough, there are not enough of those in office right now when
Yeah.
representatives literally are supposed to be representing us. They are representing their corporate interests instead. So I hope you'll follow our campaign. We're always looking for volunteers as well. Even if you don't live in Los Angeles or even California, you can help us phone bank, you can help us write postcards, or if you do live nearby, you can help us canvass, and any help is appreciated.
Yes. All right, folks. And that concludes another episode of Let's Talk. We will see you next week.
Bye, everyone.